1. My husband and I were watching a show on Hulu after putting our kids to bed. We had paused the show to discuss a theory I had about the end of the season. We finished talking, and he unpaused, then immediately got up. I remember being a touch annoyed because he does this all the time. Who unpauses, then gets up? And he always misses parts, so I have to fill him in while trying not to miss what's currently happening. Ugh, first world problems. Anyway, he went into the bathroom behind the wall that the couch is on. He ran the water for a minute, then silence. I figured he was trimming his nails after getting a drink or something, I don't know. None of this is abnormal at any rate. About this time I see an actress come on that I recognized. I wished my husband would hurry up, because I thought it was What's-Her-Face from that one show, but I wasn't sure. Suddenly my husband goes, "Isn't that What's-Her-Face from that one show?" I look over in shock. And he's back sitting next to me. Now, obviously you're thinking, duh, Crimson Stiletto. He just sat back down without you noticing. Not a glitch. And to be fair, I was wearing glasses instead of contacts, so I had poor peripheral vision. But he doesn't just stand up and sit down quietly. He does this weird roll thing off the armrest, so he can get off our absurdly deep couch without putting the footrest down because my ancient cat was laying on it. He does the same thing sitting down. The couch creaks, and he always says, "Oof," really loudly. So in addition to being a touch annoyed, I was also a bit, "Aww," because for someone who hates cats, he is very nice to my old girl. And I am an utter disaster person, and he's lithe and graceful, so I was a smidge envious, plus a touch annoyed, plus a bit, "Aw." It's not something I'd imagine being. So I'm staring at him in shock, and he gives me a look like, "What?" And I ask when he came back. He stares at me for a minute, then goes, "I never left." He maintains that he sat down 2 hours earlier and hadn't gotten up since. Like I said, this isn't uncommon, so maybe my brain just imagined a common scenario. But I also recall when my husband got up, my dog, who was laying at my footrest, and his dog, who was also on the floor, looked up and wagged their tails. I put my hand on my dog to keep him from getting up because he was keeping my feet warm. And once they get up and get all twitter-patted, they'll be nuts and won't settle down for a while. So instead of getting up, they both watched him leave. I was still leaning forward with my hand on my dog when my husband spoke next. If both dogs saw him get up, how could I have imagined it? 2. I have had a few experiences with what I believe to be glitches in the Matrix that have me questioning my sanity. They're small but definitely noteworthy. Number 1. My mom bought me a ring a couple of years ago. I remember she specifically bought a light blue stone for the ring because she knew I liked the color blue, and it matched my birthstone. I remember specifically liking the ring for the reason of it being light blue. I never really got around to wearing it because it was too small for my finger and it would have to be adjusted by a jeweler. My mom stashes it in her jewelry box and says she will have it adjusted for me. I guess she forgot because it wasn't until recently that she finally got it adjusted and gave me the ring back. To my complete and utter surprise, the stone was now dark green. Being completely baffled and almost not liking the ring anymore, I said to her, "This isn't my ring, you bought me a ring with a blue stone." She replied, "No, the stone was always green. It's been sitting in my jewelry box forever." Apparently the manufacturer of this ring doesn't create these types of rings with blue stones. This blows my mind to this day because the ring I wear doesn't look or feel right. Going from a light blue to a dark green ring, that's not something I can mistake for a false memory. It's a pretty drastic color change. Number 2. This experience is difficult to discount as a false memory, and to this day I'm still trying to find a logical explanation. Sometime last year, 2018, I had a very distinct conversation with my mom who told me that she had to fly to New York because her close friend's father died. She told me that her close friend, Aunt R, was a mess after she heard the news of her father's death and that she had to fly out to comfort Aunt R and help her with the funeral arrangements. After my mom came back from New York, I specifically remember her saying to me, "Poor Aunt R is such a mess, she loved her father so much." I also remember my mom telling me how she felt especially bad for her Aunt R's father's wife, who was all alone now. They were married for about 50 years and lived together. Fast forward to a few months ago where I'm having dinner at my mom's house. She begins talking about Aunt R. I say to her, "Oh yeah, Aunt R, how is she and Mrs. B holding up after Mr. B's death?" My mom looks at me in shock and disbelief and says, Mr. B died a few days ago. I was the first one she told. I got a call from Aunt R and she's a mess, so I'm booking a flight to New York for next week. I shook my head and said, wait, you already told me this. Didn't we talk about this a while ago? I thought you already flew out to New York to help with the funeral. It's important to note that my mom is a devout Roman Catholic, and she doesn't really like to dabble in any views, conspiracies, abstract concepts that are considered outside of her religion. I think it scares her in a sense. She ignored my response and continued making dinner, never bringing up the subject again. To this day, I still distinctly remember the first conversation my mom had in her kitchen about flying to New York, and oddly enough, this first conversation still feels even more real than the one my mom and I had a couple of months ago, even though the memory of it is drifting away. I just can't believe that the first conversation never happened. If it did, it didn't happen in this reality. I feel myself longing to be understood by someone who experienced that old reality with me, but it's impossible. It's blowing my mind that I'm feeling like I need to be validated by someone that experienced a reality with me that never existed. It's like trying to grasp at air. As I think about that first conversation more and more, it's beginning to feel like a distant memory, and I've almost convinced myself that it never happened, which is even more confusing and frustrating. 3. I walk my dog 3 times a day. He's an old boy now, so we only go on short walks, nothing more than 15 minutes, because of his bones. But today something weird happened. My friend Chloe and I went together, and we were talking about how lovely the night is. Cool weather, probably the nicest it had been in a good week or so, considering all the rain we'd had recently. Personally, I suffer from arthritis, so today I decided to cut our walk a bit shorter by going a different path. It would only cut the walk short by 2 minutes, but it made it a bit easier on my knee, and this was the first time I'd done it, so there would be no harm in it. Everything was going fine as we rounded the corner that led to my back door. My cat appearing so he could come in with us also, we start to walk down the entrance and my dog disappeared. I let him off his leash for the last few minutes of his walk so he can get the rest of his zoomies out, but this was the first time he's ever disappeared, and when he did, it was like the air changed. It wasn't that light, cool air we'd gotten used to. It was like room temperature all of a sudden, and everything was quiet. I live beside a highway, but all of a sudden I couldn't hear it. There was always a bus or car driving up or down my street, but there was nothing, and even my cat seemed confused. He was looking around everywhere, as if he was also confused as to where my dog went. Chloe and I felt panicked. My dog had never done this before, so we called his name. Nothing. We walked back on our route. Nothing. I walked to the front of my house and checked in the gardens that surrounded us. Nothing. I had to climb up and down stairs and walk much further than my body could probably have handled, but I couldn't feel the pain that I was feeling when our journey started. My cat moved and tried to help find my dog. He's always been like that. He has a pack mentality, and he separated from us, but I wasn't worried about him for some reason. I just made the mental note that he'd gone to look for him. Chloe and I were about to try going on the entire walk again after a few minutes, when all of a sudden my cat reappeared. I jokingly asked him, "Oh, have you seen Diesel yet? I still can't find him." And within a few seconds my dog appeared again. Just as he appeared, a car drove by and I could hear everything again. It was really wacky. I put my dog's leash back on and made the less than a minute journey to my back door, all the while my friend commenting on how uncomfortable she felt being outside all of a sudden. I looked back to my cat and noticed how skittish he'd become, as he moved to check behind him constantly as he sauntered beside me. We even heard a neighbor's dog growl, which normally barks as soon as you walk by it. A dog which had been silent the multiple times I walked by it and shouted on my own dog. Chloe, immediately sounding distressed, moved to the house as quickly as she could with myself, my dog, and my still skittish cat in tow. We got in and all of my pain caught up with me. I was struggling to walk up the stairs, and when we checked the clock and asked my fiancée, she said we'd only been gone for 15 minutes. This happened less than 2 hours ago, and I'm honestly quite shaken up about it. Has anybody else ever experienced something like this? I've heard that breaking the cycle you've created can cause strange things to happen. So it was strange for this to happen the one night I decided to cut the walk short and take a different path. 4. Okay, this happened July 21st, 2017. It was a Friday night and my best friend Emily and I, who wasn't my best friend at the time because we were just getting to know each other, we acknowledge that this experience is what brought us so close, and as cliché as it sounds, she is the only one I know I can trust. We had decided to go to a party a few towns away, and before anyone asks, no, we did not do drugs, we didn't drink or accept any drinks from anybody. We were not under the influence of anything. We arrived around 9 and left close to midnight. Our friend Tim had also shown up for this party, and we asked him if he wanted to go to the Denny's back in our town, and we all headed out of the party together. Let me preface this by saying that Tim is an extremely reckless and fast driver, and most sane people I know refuse to drive with this guy because they genuinely fear for their lives. Tim had parked directly in front of the house, and we saw him drive away when Emily and I were still walking to her car, which was about a block away, keep all this in mind. We get in the car, and things already feel off. But I just chalk it up to being in a somewhat sketchy area and in a neighborhood I've never been in before. We're driving, we're chatting a bit, and when we get onto the freeway we both fall silent. I feel weird, there's a ringing in my ear, my body feels like static. Also that something is pressing down on my chest and I am somewhat paralyzed. I look at Emily, who looks just as terrified as I feel. I keep trying to say something, but all that's coming out is, something is wrong. And while I remember Emily responding, saying that she felt weird too, Emily said later on that we never spoke a word this entire time. This static and ringing carry on like this for the rest of the night. I look out onto the freeway, and at first I am struck by something that's eerily beautiful. We're winding down the mountain, and the city lights slowly come into view, except none of these lights are moving. There's no sign of life, as cheesy and sci-fi as that sounds. Then I am struck with the thought of, why the hell are we going down a mountain right now? This is a freeway I have taken thousands of times in my life, but nothing is the same. What should be a flat 30-minute drive home is something much different. At that moment, I notice something even weirder. There are no cars anywhere on this 8-lane freeway. Not in our direction, not in the opposite direction. While this may be normal in other places in the world, this does not happen in California. As anyone from California, near the LA area more specifically, will tell you, it does not matter what time of day it is. There are always cars on the freeway. It's a Friday night, and it looks like we're in some post-apocalyptic world where life doesn't exist. And that's how it is for our entire drive to Denny's. Not a single car, not a single living being except the two of us. While things are starting to look somewhat familiar, we are definitely going in the right direction, and are on the freeway we have spent entire hours waiting in traffic on. I see some familiar buildings, but the writing on the buildings is different or in a different language. The names of exits are in the wrong places, if that makes sense. Like, I recognize the names, but they should be in entirely different towns or countries for that matter. We drive straight for 30 minutes, and no matter which freeway we would have taken, we should have had to merge onto different freeways and whatnot, but we didn't. Eventually we make it to Denny's, which is usually packed Friday nights, because it's the only place in my small town that's open, after all the bars close and the drunk people like waffles. I don't know. We don't see anyone driving, but there are a few cars in the parking lot. It's about 12:45 at this point, and this is the most desolate I've ever seen a Denny's in my entire life. Emily and I still haven't said anything to each other, and they're just going through the motions, completely in shock. We sit down for about 10 minutes before we both start audibly freaking out to each other and trying to explain what had just happened. But things still feel off. It feels like everyone is staring at us. We weren't making a scene or anything. We were just whispering to each other. At the same time, we seemed to both remember Tim, who we were supposed to meet there. And right as we both go to bring it up, he walks in. We start to explain to Tim what just happened. We asked him what took him so long, and he seemed confused. He took the same freeway, of which he saw a bunch of cars on the freeway. He didn't stop anywhere, he left before us and drove straight to Denny's. It made no sense how we were there before him. let alone a good 20 minutes before him. But even he was acting weird, almost robotic. Like everything we had to say was reactionary, but not in the sense that he was shocked or surprised by anything we were telling him. I was staring out the big window, and it's just pitch black outside. And I know from spending one too many nights at this exact Denny's that I should be looking at a bank. But it's not there. The bank isn't there. Emily looks and says, "Yeah, it's not," then goes back to being silent. About 5 minutes later, when I looked back, it had magically reappeared. Neither of us eats, and we decide to go to my house. We turn on the TV and fall asleep in my living room. I woke up the next morning next to Emily, who wakes up and asks me where I went. "Huh?" I said. She explained to me that she woke up at around 3 a.m. and I was gone. She assumed I had just gone to my room or something. But I didn't, and I have never sleepwalked in my life, to my knowledge at least. After that, I have tried to figure out what happened. Emily doesn't like to talk about it because it scares her. Everything changed after that. We had hung out with friends the day after who said we were both acting differently. As for our friends, everyone seemed off, like they weren't real. Or they weren't my friends and family. And any time I have told anyone this, like my mom, they don't feel like the people I used to know. They never deny it or say that I am crazy. They just all kind of nod and move on from it. There was a point where Emily and I just sat and cried in my car about a month later because everything just felt wrong and we couldn't explain how or why. And we both still feel that way. 5. At our old house, we had a couch and 2 recliners in the living room. My wife and I each had our favorite chairs, but it's not like we were banned from each other's chairs either. This isn't super important, it just adds to the weirdness later. So one day I come home from work and plop down in my recliner. My wife had dinner cooking and I dozed off for a few minutes. When I woke up, my wife was sitting in her chair. I go to check on dinner, sit up, and notice that my keys and pocket knife had slipped out of my pocket and down into the recliner. No big deal, happens all the time. I reach down my seat cushion and find my knife and keys are not there. Sometimes stuff falls deeper into the chair and can end up on the floor, or stuck somewhere kind of below the cushion. Or they can even slide down the back of the chair and get caught up in the back. If you can't tell, we recover a lot of stuff from our recliners. I briefly search all the likely spots and they're not there. Maybe my toddler pickpocketed me and hid the keys like my wife's wedding ring disappeared for 4 months. He swore that he didn't play with my keys, but you can never trust him, right? After dinner, I pull apart my recliner, take the back off, pick the base up, and shake it, listening for key sounds or to work them loose. Flip it upside down and inspect everything. Play with the footrest and get everything moving because they're probably stuck somewhere, etc. There was nowhere inside the chair that I didn't inspect. No keys. Being a sensible person, I also tore apart my wife's recliner, even though I knew I wasn't in that chair. Maybe I misremembered. Same process, same results. No keys. I had copies of all my keys, so it wasn't a huge deal, and we figured they would turn up eventually. About 7 or 8 months later, we moved out from that place into a new one. I figured we'd probably come across the keys in the move, thinking that our son had nicked and hidden the keys. I was right. Sort of. We didn't really need the recliners at the new place, so we left them at the old place for a few months. Eventually, we emptied out the old place and my dad was helping me load up the 2 recliners. If you've never moved recliners, the easiest way to get them out is to kick the footrest, maybe take the back off if you need to navigate corners. And that makes it thin enough, carried on its side, that you can get them in and out of anywhere. We got my recliner out by just kicking out the footrest since it's a straight shot out the front door, and I'm telling him about how I never found those keys that went missing. The universe likes foreshadowing and has a sense of humor. Move on to the wife's recliner. You know, the one I don't remember sitting in when I lost the keys. Had been used daily for another 7 or 8 months, and had already been searched extensively. Dad kicks out the footrest using the lever, something that had been done at least once daily since the keys disappeared for about 8 months. And immediately there was a sound of keys hitting the floor. I'm not sure why this hadn't happened in the thousands of times the footrest was out when we were still at that place, but apparently if we stayed and reclined in that chair just one more time, I would have found my keys sooner. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, episode 113. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm really tempted to walk over to the local gas station, petrol station, to get coffee. I have stuff to make coffee, but they do ones with like fancy flavours over there. And I did discover the other day they also do iced coffee. I know, a bit warm, and it would be very nice right now. So I need to decide, as I take a little break in between those videos, would it be worth walking over and paying the £3 or whatever it is for the coffee? Or should I just not be a lazy pooper and make my own? Tough decisions. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.